The story begins with Peter narrating how he refuses to accept no-win situations. He reflects on his battles against crazed demigods, deranged goblins, and even the devil himself. He insists that despite facing overwhelming odds, he always clung to hope. The scene shifts to the interior of the Daily Bugle, where undead hordes are overrunning the building. The few survivors, including J Jonah Jameson, are shielded by Spider-Man, who continues to fend off relentless waves of zombies, even though the hope he spoke of earlier is beginning to wane despite his determination to maintain it. Jonah urges his remaining staff to stand their ground, reassuring them they'll survive this ordeal. But Peter senses the fear in his voice, sending a shiver down Spider-Man's spine. While battling the zombies, Peter's thoughts drift to Aunt May and Mary Jane, praying they've found safety somewhere. He then faces a zombified Betty Brant, Jonah's secretary, but more importantly to Peter, the first girl he ever loved. Robbie Robertson then attacks him, and Peter reminds us that Robbie was the first person at the Bugle to believe in him, a true friend, he says. But Peter knows he must now see them differently, as monsters. Peter mentions that thinking about Aunt May and MJ fuels his hope, which is what keeps him going. The zombies are everywhere, he notes. They're clawing, biting, pushing, and killing, but he knows he has to find a way to defeat them no matter what. Spider-Man takes a quick glance back at his remaining Bugle colleagues, the ones still alive, and sees the fear in their eyes. He feels he cannot afford to let them down. Jonah pulls the fire alarm, momentarily distracting the undead and giving Spider-Man a brief opportunity to try and contact the Avengers through his watch. Spider-Man's despair deepens when all he hears is static from his communication device while trying to reach the Avengers. Not wanting to add to the growing sense of hopelessness, he decides not to tell Jonah that the Avengers are AWOL. Spider-Man instructs Jonah to get his people to safety. Jonah asks about Spider-Man's well-being, but Peter tells him not to worry. However, Spider-Man realizes Jonah's concern for him is a reflection of just how dire the situation has become. Hawkeye's voice suddenly comes through the communications, informing Spider-Man that the Avengers are on their way. Spider-Man now feels a renewed sense of hope as the Avengers will now be joining the fray, but then his spider sense immediately goes off. Instinctively, he strikes whatever is behind him, but he acknowledges that the action drains him. His body aches, his vision is blurred, and there's blood in his mouth. Sensing something behind him again, he turns, only to be utterly stunned. The next zombie to attack him is none other than Aunt May, who appears to be in a frenzy, angrily demanding to know where her nephew Peter is. Despite the savage attacks from May, Spider-Man refuses to defend himself against the woman who raised him. He tells himself it must be a hallucination or some trick by Norman, Harry, or the Jackal. He knows it's really her, though. Despite the stench of death and decay, he can still smell her familiar perfume. And she's even wearing the blouse she had joyfully purchased with her savings just a few days ago. As she beats him, Spider-Man doesn't fight back. Instead, he reflects on everything Aunt May has ever done for him. He says she gave him her all, every minute of her time, every dime she had. He reflects on how she's a good woman, the best, just as she pulls back, preparing to strike him with a brick. To his dismay, she keeps demanding to know what he's done with Peter. Spider-Man then realizes that his zombified Aunt May is simply searching for her nephew, desperate to know what became of him. At last, he removes his mask, revealing to her that he is Peter Parker. The revelation seems to momentarily bring May back to herself, despite her infection. Confused and horrified at her monstrous state, she tearfully pleads with Peter to end her suffering, which he begins to do, though it fills him with immense sorrow. Peter has to remind himself that this isn't truly Aunt May, as he beats her until she becomes unconscious. He feels the last shred of hope slip away as he looks at her mutilated body on the ground, and realizes he has been bitten on the arm, signaling his inevitable infection by the virus. Jonah rushes out of the room where the survivors are hiding, trying to save Peter, only to find Spider-Man succumbing to the infection, with Peter shouting for him to run.